Random thoughts. In this video, we are going to continue reading parts of Sir Richard Burton's book, First Steps in East Africa, Exploration of Harar, and we are reading parts where he's telling us the attack that happened on him and his team somewhere near Berbera. And this is a book that was published in 1850s, and it's a book where he talks about his journey from Aden to Zeila to Harar and then to Berbera. And it's while they are in Berbera that they have this camp and then they are attacked at night. The previous video, we read how him and some of his team members managed to get into a ship, but they are still trying to get everyone on ship. Of course, at least everyone who is not hurt, but even those that were hurt, they were trying to get them on board. And at this point, seems to me that the attackers were not interested in wiping them out. Seems like that was not their interest. I don't know why. Seems like they was either maybe could be because maybe Richard Burton and his team still had power in terms of weapons more than they did. Maybe that could be the reason. But I think there's also a possibility that they were not really interested in doing that. Or maybe there was a disagreement among them as to what extent they needed to go. Now, this is what he says. Now, some of them are on the ship, others are not. He continues, on the other hand, Lieutenant Speke's escape was in every way wonderful. Sailing from the tent, he leveled his Dean and Adams close to an assailant's breast. The pistol refused to revolve. A sharp blow of war club upon the chest felled our comrade who was in the rear and unseen. So Lieutenant Speke has a gun that fails to work. When he fell, 2 or 3 men sprang upon him, pinioned his hands behind, felled him for concealed weapons, an operation to which he submitted in Somalia, and led him towards the rear as he supposed to be slaughtered. There Lieutenant Speke, who could scarcely breathe upon the pain of the blow, asked a captor to tie his hands before instead of behind, and begged a drop of water to relieve his excruciating thirst. The savage defended him against a number of the Somal who came up and threatening and brandishing their spears. He brought a cloth for the wounded man to lie upon and lost no time in procuring a drop of water. So there is some confusion here about what was the intent of the attack. Seems like some of the attackers at some point were trying to help these people, and at some point there's a lot of confusion here. So Speke seems like he's captured, and he seems he's tied, and some people want to harm him or hurt him even more, and others are not, and he's tied, and he asked for water, and they provide him water. We continue to say, Lieutenant Speke remained upon the ground till dawn. During the interval, he witnessed the war dance of the savages, a scene striking in the extreme. So he's tied, and these attackers are dancing and maybe singing some war songs or things like that. The tallest and largest warriors marched in a ring round the tent and booty, singing with the deepest and most solemn tones the song of thanksgiving. At a little distance, the grey uncertain light discolored 4 or 5 men lying desperately hurt, while their kinsmen kneaded their limbs, poured water upon their wounds, and placed lumps of dates in their stiffening hands. As day broke, the division of plunder caused angry passion to rise. The dead and dying were abandoned. One party made a rush upon the cattle, and with shouts and yells drove them off towards the wild. Some loaded themselves with goods, others fought over pieces of cloth which they tore with hands and dagger, whilst the disappointed, vociferating with rage, struck at one another and brandishing their spears. More than once during these scenes, a panic seized them. They moved off in the body to some distance, and there is little doubt that had our guard struck one blow, we might still have won the day. So he's describing a disagreement among the attackers, and the attacker seems like they start fighting over the stuff that was in the camp, and maybe while they are doing that, they forget about the attack itself, and these other guys are still, I think, in the ship or something, and a few of their guys, including Lieutenant Speke, who are held, and maybe that's how they got to run away. Let's see what happens. Lieutenant Speke's captor went to seek his own portion of the spoil. When a Somal came up and asked his Hindustani what business the Frank had in their country, and added that he would kill him if a Christian, but spare the life of the brother Muslim, the wounded man replied that he was going to Zanzibar, that he was still a Nazarene, and therefore that the work had better be done at once. The savage laughed and passed on. He was succeeded by a second, who, equally passionate, whirled a sword around his head, twice pretended to strike, but returned to the plunder without doing damage. So these people are coming to Speke, making some jokes, threatening him as if they are going to hurt him, and not doing it actually, and going to continue, of course, talking about the loot and how they were going to divide it amongst themselves. He continues to say, "Presently came another man of assailant, Lieutenant Speke, who had extricated his hands, caught the spear leveled at his breast, but received at the same moment a blow from a club, which, paralyzing his arm, caused him to lose his hold. In defending his heart from the succession of thrust, he received severe wounds on the back of his hand." So Spec seems like tries to maybe fight back, and in that process he tried to capture a spear, and that process is hurt even more. His right shoulder and his left thigh. Pausing a little, the wretch crossed to the other side and suddenly passed his spear clean through the right leg of the wounded man. The latter, smelling death, then leaped up and, taking advantage of his assailant terror, rushed headlong towards the sea. Looking behind, he avoided the javelin hurled at his back and had the good fortune to run without further accident. The gauntlet of a score of missiles. So Spec rushes from that environment, and he rushes towards the sea, and they are throwing stuffs at him, and they miss him. And when the pursuit was discontinued, he sat down, faint from loss of blood, upon a sandhill. Recovering strength by a few minutes' rest, he staggered onto the town, where same old women directed him to us. So these other guys has run away, and Spec is by himself. He's been captured, he's been hurt, he runs away, and he goes to a certain village. And it's at this place that he is directed by someone to where these other guys had escaped. Then, pursuing his way, he fell in with a party sent to seek him, and by their aid reached the craft. Now, this is very interesting. There are people who are sent to go look for him, and they find him. But instead of taking him back, they help him go to the ship, which is very, very interesting. Having walked and run at least 3 miles, after receiving 11 wounds, 2 of which had pierced his thighs, touching a lesson how difficult it is to kill a man in sound health. So he says, even though he was so hurt in so many ways, Spec manages to live, and he reaches the other party. And this tells us that there was more story, or more things that were happening than what he's telling us. I think there is other things that were happening, because it doesn't not make sense that even people who are sent to look for him would then help him get into the ship instead of capturing him and taking him back. Now we're going to see what happens, or the aftermath of the attack. Those are my random thoughts.